We are here today in Grand Coteau, Louisiana. It's a beautiful, windy day, and we are walking holy ground here in this town. The Jesuits settled here, the Society of the Sacred Heart all settled here roughly 200 years ago. So the number of masses and holy events that have occurred here, it's hard to find it anywhere else. There's even been a miracle that has been documented in Rome that occurred here. We know of saints who have walked these grounds, and these are the things that we're going to talk about here on this episode of Roots of Faith. I'm sitting in the gardens at Sacred Heart Academy in Grand Coteau, and I have as my guest today Sister Barbara Morrow. More or less, I've been told, is a historian for this place, and Sister Morrow does do tours of the facility. You know, Grand Coteau and this academy is known worldwide for its holiness, and you know, we'd like to bring that to y'all. So, Sister, tell us a little bit about where we are today and when it all started.
Well, for us, it started in 1821 when two religious were sent here, and the property was given to us by the Smith family. Charles Smith had a great desire to foster Catholic education in southwest Louisiana, but he died before he could see his dream fulfilled, but his wife wanted to fulfill his promise, and so she gave us a house, kind of a basic Acadiana cottage, 2 stories, and that was in 1821. And in 1830, we started building this building in back of us, and it was built in sections. And the bricks were made from the property here, and there's a little pond across the road where all the clay was dug. And so the first section was done in 1830s, and then they'd build another section. And then they got to the chapel in 1850, and this wing back here, which is our library today, was built in the 1870s.
So y'all have been here, so it's just progressed on the same piece of property over time.
And
Great.
the gardens were built at
when they came?
As they started the building, they started building the gardens here, and those beautiful oaks across the road were built actually by a Jesuit father who, they'd have some shade because they were eventually became our chaplains, and so we have to thank them for that.
And just so our viewers know, not to interrupt you, but when we talk about the Jesuits, St. Charles College is here in Grand Coteau, and the alley of oaks connected the college where the Jesuits were, and they came in later, 17 years after y'all, like 1838, 37. To establish that, and that provided y'all with priests for Mass, and then for all of that they do there with the boys school and seminary. So when she was talking about the alley trees being planted by them, so continue. I'm sorry.
In fact, our chapel was delayed in building because we provided over 200,000 bricks for the Jesuits to begin St. Charles College.
That was their enticement, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And so as the building grew and the student population grew, obviously we were here during the Civil War. And at that time, when the Union forces came, General Nathaniel Banks was in charge, and he came on the property to speak to Reverend Mother. And as Providence would have it, his daughter was at Sacred Heart in New York. Not only that, but the Reverend Mother there had been a pupil here.
Oh, wow.
And Mother Hardy was from Arneville. So God has worked his way into our lives so many times. And so we were spared the ravages of war, and he provided provisions for us and for the Jesuits until the Union forces left. And we have a copy of a letter in our museum where he tells our mother what he's going to do for us, and also that he ordered his troops that no one was to harm anyone or destroy any of the property, they would be put to death.
Wow.
So we've survived hurricanes, diseases, and with the grace of God, we hope we'll
That's it. And
continue.
this is the oldest school for the Sacred Heart that has been in continuous
Existence in the world, because we have
world.
schools all over the world.
The world. And, plenty of schools. I know we have the Sacred Heart, we're at Convent, Louisiana, at St. Michael's,
Yes.
but that school has not continued. And so this one,
A hurricane
this
destroyed
is
it.
the main.
Well, and then we have our school in New Orleans.
Right, but this is the oldest
Yes,
that's
this
been
is
in existence,
yes.
continued existence.
St. Charles,
so-
Missouri was the first, because that's where St. Philippine Duchesne was sent. And then that school closed for a few years, and then we came in 1821, so that's why we have that
That
distinction.
distinction. Sister Morrow, you were telling us, how this building has been constructed in sections, and that 1830 section, or even the second one, the girls were always here and it grew, but significant things have happened. And one of the things that makes this place so holy is that there's a shrine here.
Correct.
And if I'm correct, it is the only shrine, is it in the world or in the U.S.? In the U.S. that is on the site of the miracle?
I think the distinction is because obviously there have been miracles taking place in the United States, and there have probably been apparitions, which I do not know
Right.
about. But we had the miracle, but a shrine was actually established on the site of the miracle, and the church recognizing the apparition. So it's those three things that distinguish it from other places that would have a shrine where no miracle
Right.
occurred, or that kind of thing.
So tell us about what led up to what happened here. So
Shortly after the Civil War, a young woman by the name of Mary Wilson had entered with us. Mary was from Canada. Her family were Presbyterians. And at some point in her early 20s, she joined some of her cousins to go on a family trip to St. Louis. And while there, she met a young woman who invited her to go to Mass at St. Louis College Church. And the Mass so moved her that she continued to go and eventually asked one of the Jesuits to help her to become a Catholic. Now, when she told her family about this, they said if she proceeded with this, that they would never speak to her again, and that's actually what happened. So after she became a Catholic, she felt she had a religious vocation, and so the Jesuits sent her we had a school, obviously, in St. Louis, but once she entered, she became very ill, and they sent her down here. In fact, she was actually sent to St. Michael's first.
Oh.
And I'm not quite sure why they sent her up here. But she continued to get worse. And the two doctors who were treating her realized that nothing they were doing was helping her. And she hadn't been able to eat for several weeks. And so they basically told her mother that they would just try to keep her as comfortable as possible. And so at that time, in early December of 1866, the nuns began a novena to then Blessed John Berchmans. And I think it's our Jesuit brothers who encouraged us, because he had recently been beatified. And John Berchmans was from the Flemish part of Belgium, Dietz, Belgium. And as a young man, he wanted to become a Jesuit, so he eventually walked to Rome and began his studies. But because he gave of himself, he caught one of those Roman fevers and died in his early 20s. So they began the novena, and on the morning of December 14th, Mary's in the room that was our infirmary, and the nuns were downstairs for Mass, and while praying, Mary just really asked God to give her some relief, because she really suffered a lot. And she said while praying, she felt that someone touched her on the mouth, and she opened her eyes, and she saw a young man at the foot of the bed. And she said, "Are you John Berchmans?" And his response was, "Yes, God heard your prayers. Your sufferings are over." And at that moment, she was completely cured. No outward sign of any illness, which I mean, today we'd probably say it was some sort of cancer. I'm not really
Right.
sure. But anyway, so when Reverend Mother comes up after Mass thinking that Mary was either in a coma or dead, to her surprise, Mary's sitting on the side of the bed and asking for something to eat and permission to go downstairs. But she didn't say anything about her experience. So she got something to eat, and the next day she went downstairs, and one of the doctors came to check up on her. And when he saw her, he couldn't believe it was the same person. And he told her mother, he says, I don't know what happened here, but nothing I did or the other doctor did that could have made this happen. So Mary was to get the habit as a novice, get the white veil. And I think it's at that some point when she was talking with her superior that she probably mentioned something about that. But Reverend Mother didn't make a big announcement. She told a couple of council members and a couple of the Jesuits. So Mary gets the habit. And at some point, Mary's asked to write her autobiography and to explain what had happened to her. Sometime later, John Berkmans appeared to her again and told her that basically that although God was pleased with her fidelity to her religious life, that she wouldn't live to make her first vows, which for us takes 2 years. Mm-hmm. All Mary said was, will it be soon or later? Mary said nothing. In August of 1867, Mary fainted at Mass. They brought her upstairs. She went into a coma and died several days later of a cerebral hemorrhage. Now, Mary is buried out in our cemetery. And so sometimes after her death, the Jesuits sort of had a dilemma. She's cured, but within 7 months, she's dead. But notwithstanding, the Bishop of New Orleans gave them permission to begin the cause for canonization. So in time, the Jesuits' testimony, some of our sisters, the 2 doctors, that information was given to the bishop in New Orleans, and he eventually sent it on to Rome, where it was accepted as the 3rd miracle for his canonization. He was canonized in 1888, and he's the patron saint of altar servers and of young men studying to become Jesuits. Now, last December 14th was the 150th anniversary of that miracle. And the pastor in Shreveport got permission to bring a special relic of John Berkmans from Belgium. Because John Berkmans died so young, they actually did an autopsy, but when they finished, which was not unusual at that period of time, the heart was given to the Jesuits, and had been in Belgium ever since. But Father Peter Mangum got permission, and it was in residence in Shreveport, and it came here on December 14th. And on that day, between 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock, almost 2,000 people walked through that little shrine to venerate that sacred relic of St. John Berkmans. And in our museum, we have the holy card that Mary had at in the shrine. We have the holy card that Mary had at the time. We have our own relic of St. John Berkmans. And we also have a little crucifix, a little wooden crucifix that actually belonged to John Berkmans. And also in the shrine, we have a relic of St. Philippine Duchesne and our founder, St. Madeline Sophie.
Oh, fantastic.
And so that's the story of the miracle of Grand Coteau.
Sister Maura, we talked about the miracle. Prior to that, we were talking about the development of the grounds. And this building next to us looks a little bit different than the older buildings. Tell us more about other buildings that you have here.
In 1939, this was built as a college for women, and so this would have been the administration wing, and then the other wing would have been the college classrooms, and then the rooms would have been the college dorms. But it closed in 1956, and when it closed, then the high school, which had been housed in that building, moved over to this wing, so that's why it's different. And if you go in this hall, there are pictures of Sacred Heart schools throughout the United States. There are 21 Sacred Heart. We belong to the network of Sacred Heart schools, and it's a picture of each one. And as you walk down, you'll see there's a beautiful wooden statue of the Sacred Heart. And in the front hall, there's a statue of Our Lady, which is particular to Sacred Heart schools. It's Our Lady sitting down, and she's in pink, which is most unusual. But in the 1840s, one of our young religious, we had a school at the top of the Spanish Steps, the Trinidad de Monte, and she got permission to paint a fresco. But when she finished, the colors were so vivid they covered it up because grandmother thought it was ugly. And sometimes later when they went to clean the curtain, they realized that it had gone into this lovely light pastel pink. And when Pius IX went to visit the nuns, he saw the statue and he called it Mater Admirabilis, Mother Most Admirable. And it is one of the petitions in the litany of Our Lady. And we celebrate that feast throughout the world on October 20th. And in the statue, Mary, there's a lily, which obviously would symbolize her purity. There's some wool and a distaff. It shows that she was a woman who worked with her hands. And at the foot, there's a book, which obviously isn't correct, because they would have scrolls back then, but to show that Mary was a woman of prayer. And so every October 20th, the Feast of Mater, and the thing that most children will remember on that day, we have a treat after Mass, and in French, that little treat is called goûter. And we always have something that it has to have pink icing.
For the pink.
For the pink. So that's something that's you won't find it in any missal.
Very unique to your order,
to our congregation,
to your congregation, and to this school.
And so every school has a picture or a statue of Mater.
Two thoughts there that come to mind for me. One, when you were talking and you said the Pope visited, the original is in Rome.
Yes.
Where it was done was in Rome, right? Okay, I thought so.
Yes.
And then when you said the
we
Pope
no
visited,
longer. It's really a French building. It needed a lot of repair, and we didn't want to put the money into it. So it's released by another congregation who all you have to do is go up and say Mater, and they will let
do you see the original?
you see the original.
Okay.
And all our graduates get a little Sacred Heart passport, and they just have to show that also.
Oh, wonderful.
And
the other thing that comes to mind when you were saying it was a young novitiate that had painted it.
A young nun.
A young nun. Okay, because this school here on these grounds, at one time they would come here to study for.
Yes, at the beginning they would begin their religious life here, and at some point during one of the Mexican revolutions, we actually had the Mexican novices here.
So, and I read about that because they were bilingual,
Yes.
and we're talking about over 100 some odd years, right?
Yes,
When
yes.
did they stop doing the novitiate here? It was in the I mean, you don't need an exact date, but around the 1900s, wasn't it? Late 1800s, early 1900s?
Probably.
Because the Spanish, when they were trilingual, was in the late 1800s.
Right.
So even then, when we talk about holy ground, folks, I mean, think of the young women who came here to enter, you
Yes.
know, the order. So just
Right.
another tidbit that came to mind when you were talking about.
See,
the young
I went to
painting.
Albany, New York, in my time. That's where we went.
But this place, it was over 100 from
Yeah.
1821 to
Right.
180 years. So
Yes.
I didn't mean to stop
Yeah,
you telling
yeah.
us a little bit more.
And so when we moved out of this main building, the Religious of the Sacred Heart, and my congregation is called the Society of the Sacred Heart, founded by St. Madeline Sophie in 1800. And when you see our initials, you're wondering where the H is, but because we're French order, it's Religieux du Sacré-Cœur de Jésus. So that's why it's a J and not an H. Very
I've wondered,
confusing to people. And so another place that I bring groups to is we have a small museum that was created when our religious went to our retirement home in St. Charles, Missouri. And one of the sisters just went to our archives and the attic and just brought down things that were particular to the school, our early religious life. And one of the things that we have in the museum, other than we have the copy of the letter of General Banks, But we actually have a desk that when Philippine visited this campus in 1822 and 1829, the desk that was in her room is a beautiful Louisiana cypress. You call it like a little secretary where the lid points out. And we have some of the original old cypress beams and shingles. We have our own branding iron, which is kind of the heart and the cross, which is because we were working plantation. And the other things that I point out that that we actually had in this over near the parking lot, we actually had a school for African Americans on this property, and later on it was moved to the town of Grand Coteau and became St. Peter Claver. And also in the late 1800s, founded St. Ignatius School and taught there for over 65 years until the Sisters of St. Joseph took that over. So we have a long history of education. And on this wall here in this front hall is a kind of wall of plaques. And one of the plaques is from the Knights and Ladies of Peter Claver. And it's to the religious of the Sacred Heart in gratitude for their education in this part of the world. So, of all things, that was one of the things we're most proud of.
We were just talking on break, and there's so much more than we can ever cover here that's here on these grounds. A couple of points. Cornelia Conley, another holy woman, actually lived here at one time, and her house is right here on these grounds as well, right?
Right. In fact, I live in not the part that she lived in because we added on, but in the 1830s, the religious realized they had to build something for visiting priests because they couldn't stay, in the same building. So it was a little two and a half room little cottage with a front porch. And at some point, Cornelia Conley, who's the foundress of the Holy Childhood Sisters, was living there and taught music here. And she taught for a few years, and then after the total breakup of her marriage, she moved on and eventually founded the congregation in England.
Right.
But many of her congregation do come to visit
really?
those
Yeah.
two little rooms. And
No, it's fine.
moving on beyond the cottage, which is over there, you would come across the barn, which was built, parts of it were built in the early 50s and
1850s?
1850
Because this was a working plantation, yeah,
right,
1850s.
right. And then next to the barn we have the cemetery, and we actually had to renew the cemetery because the crosses went such disrepair that we made it easier to take care of, so that's why it doesn't look like it did in the old days.
But it is the original cemetery.
Oh,
It's been here since this
yes.
place
Yeah,
came
you can
here.
find the
Yes.
first grave, and Mary Wilson.
I was about to say Mary Wilson's there,
is
is
buried
she not?
there. The third row, practically right in the middle, and beyond the grave, unique to not only Sacred Heart schools but many schools, we have an equestrian program. We have a new closed arena, and we teach both styles of riding. We teach the English and the Western, and so it's and the students here can get PE credit for because they do go
that's
for their
awesome.
lessons, and then they go to horse shows either with us or on their own. So it's a very unique program. And as I said, it's just beyond the cemetery. And didn't talk about the boys' school, which
Awesome.
St. John
Yes.
Berkman's Academy of the Sacred Heart was founded in 2006. And so our campus is known as 2 schools, 1 campus. And at present, they're in portable buildings back of our gym. And eventually, we hope to build closer to the Jesuit property. We've already started some of the infrastructure. We have a baseball field. So so we always have to have 2 of everything. We have to have 2 honors assemblies, two graduations.
Because it's two schools.
It's two schools, yes.
And the presence of the boys, I mean, when you look historically at the Jesuits having been here, there were boys'
Yes,
schools,
yes.
you know, over time
Right.
anyway. So it's just the girls' school has survived, you know, this long
Right.
tenure. So it's comfortable to have the boys' school here. It's part of this holy ground, you know, from
Right.
the history of the Jesuits that are here,
Right,
correct?
and they have their own programs. There are no classes together. You know, we try to really, you know, even though it's a small school, it's a little difficult to manage a schedule, but they do the best to maintain that the uniqueness of teaching young men and teaching young women.
Yeah, which is not uncommon. I went to an all-girls school in Baton
Right,
Rouge, right,
right.
with Catholic High at St. John's Academy, Catholic High next door, you know, right
Yeah.
down the street. So
And this past summer, the religious had a meeting in St. Louis, and in a few days after that, they had what they called a spirituality forum that was open to not only to us, but to anyone in our schools, and to our students. And so 4 of our students went, so they got to share with Sacred Heart students throughout the United States. And the whole focus was obviously on the life of Philippine, because as we approach the bicentennial
Centennial.
of the founding of the school in St. Charles.
amazing. Well, you know, besides the grounds here, we haven't touched upon. I mean, when we talk about this is the academy, which has been awesome to be here, and we talked about your cemetery, but on these holy grounds, including the Jesuits, there are 4 cemeteries, correct? It came to mind. It came to mind when you talked about the spirituality of the kids. What else is here before we close? Because there's so much, we're running out of time. But you've got 2 Jesuits, a new one and an old one, I believe. Then you've
Correct.
got
Okay.
the church, St. Charles Borromeo Cemetery,
Yeah,
and your
then-
cemetery.
then we have here,
And
yes.
when I was reading in books, it said they had more people buried in the cemeteries than they did living in the whole community here. You know, because we're just about out of time. But
Yes.
not to leave on that
yes.
note. You were talking about the spirituality of these children, and there's also retreat centers that are in the
Oh,
whole
absolutely.
area of Grand Coteau as well. And so, you know, there's one, or is there
Well,
2?
they have a group retreat house called Our Lady of the Oaks. Those are group retreats, mostly men, but now they have groups for women, and I think they even have some married couple retreats.
Oh, good.
And then the huge building of the Jesuits, they have the retreat center that's private retreats.
That's it. Yeah.
Private, you know, 7, 5, 30-day. And also in that building, they have their retired folks and also the novitiate for
Wow.
young men
Yeah, so
studying
it's-
to be
so-
Jesuits. So.
Yeah, even that, again, how holy this area is. So we're just about out of time now, but I can't thank you enough for talking
my pleasure.
to me about this, just as about St. Philippine as well. But just an amazing place to be. And folks, if you've never come here, they do tours, on Wednesdays?
Daily.
Daily?
Between 9 and 3.
So yes, if you're interested in visiting here, if you have a daughter or a granddaughter that might want to go here, or even to the boys' school, you know, let them know and take a tour of this place. There's so much history, and I mean, really, the Christianity here for all of the United States is like the cradle, because this was in the beginning. So thank you for joining us. Join us again for another episode of Fruits of Faith.